My wife told me I was embarrassing her at her veterinary conference, so I let her colleague offer me a multi-million-dollar contract instead. What happened next completely destroyed her career and gave me the respect I'd been missing for years. I should have realized something was fundamentally wrong when Sierra started treating my successful solar panel installation business like a hobby she was too polite to discourage. I'd built SolarTech Solutions from nothing into a thriving renewable energy company with 42 employees and seven-figure annual revenue, but somehow my wife had convinced herself that her veterinary degree made her the only real professional in our marriage. The Miami conference was supposed to be a celebration of her 5 years at the animal hospital, and I'd flown down to support her like any good husband would. I'd arranged for my project manager to handle our 3 active commercial installations, cleared my schedule for 4 days, and even bought a new suit because Sierra insisted I needed to look the part of a successful spouse. The awards dinner was held at the Fontainebleau, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers, filled with veterinarians discussing practice management and new medical technologies. I was genuinely excited to meet Sierra's colleagues and learn about their work, maybe even share some insights about how renewable energy could transform veterinary facilities. I'd recently completed a solar installation for a large animal clinic in Tampa that cut their energy costs by 68%, and I thought other veterinarians might be interested in similar solutions. That enthusiasm lasted exactly until Sierra started introducing me to people. When Dr. Martinez from Jacksonville asked what I did for work, Sierra jumped in before I could answer, saying I was just her husband and quickly steering the conversation towards some new surgical technique she'd been learning. When Dr. Thompson mentioned struggling with high electricity bills at his practice, I started explaining how commercial solar installations typically pay for themselves within 3 to 4 years, but Sierra interrupted to ask about his daughter's college applications instead. The pattern repeated throughout the cocktail hour until I realized she was actively preventing me from contributing to any professional conversations. The worst moment came when a group was discussing sustainability challenges in veterinary medicine, specifically how to reduce the environmental impact of energy-intensive medical equipment. I knew this topic inside and out, had written articles for trade publications about solar solutions for healthcare facilities, but when I started sharing some insights about battery storage systems and net metering, Sierra actually put her hand on my arm and suggested I go fetch her another glass of wine. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. My own wife had literally sent me away from a conversation I was qualified to lead because she was embarrassed by my expertise. I walked to the bar, ordered her wine, and spent the next few minutes watching her animated discussion about energy efficiency with people who were asking questions I could have answered definitively. That's when I realized that somewhere along the way, Sierra had decided my success wasn't worth acknowledging, that my business achievements were somehow less legitimate than her veterinary degree, and that she was more comfortable treating me like an accessory than a partner. I was returning with Sierra's wine when Dr. Vanessa Sterling made her entrance, and everything changed. She was the new hospital administrator everyone had been talking about, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who'd just taken over operations for a chain of veterinary hospitals across South Florida. While Sierra and her colleagues seemed intimidated by Vanessa's reputation for efficiency and innovation, I watched her scan the room with the calculating gaze of someone who understood business at a level most veterinarians never reached. When Sierra introduced us, Vanessa's handshake was firm and her attention immediately focused on me rather than politely dismissing me like everyone else had. She asked what I did, and before Sierra could deflect, I told her about SolarTech Solutions and our commercial renewable energy installations. Instead of the glazed-over politeness I'd been receiving all evening, Vanessa leaned forward with genuine interest and started asking detailed technical questions about system sizing, permitting processes, and return on investment calculations for medical facilities. She wanted to know about battery backup systems for critical equipment, how solar installations affected insurance rates, and whether we'd worked with any veterinary practices before. I found myself explaining the Tampa Clinic project in detail, describing how we designed a hybrid system that maintained power for surgical suites during outages while dramatically reducing operating costs. Vanessa was taking mental notes, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated she understood both the technical and financial aspects of what I was describing. For the first time all evening, I was having a real professional conversation with someone who respected my expertise. Sierra stood beside us looking increasingly uncomfortable as Vanessa continued engaging me about renewable energy solutions, asking about feasibility studies and implementation timelines for large-scale projects. When Vanessa mentioned that her hospital network was planning facility upgrades over the next 18 months and was specifically looking at sustainability initiatives, I could see Sierra's expression tighten with something that looked suspiciously like panic. The conversation took an interesting turn when Vanessa looked directly at Sierra and asked why she'd never mentioned her husband's renewable energy expertise during their recent facility planning meetings. Sierra stammered something about keeping personal and professional matters separate, but Vanessa's raised eyebrows suggested she found that explanation as inadequate as I did. Here was concrete proof that Sierra had been actively hiding my professional identity from her colleagues, treating my successful business like a shameful secret rather than something to be proud of. Vanessa continued questioning Sierra about whether cost reduction and environmental responsibility weren't important considerations for modern veterinary practices, and whether having direct access to solar energy expertise might be valuable for their expansion planning. I watched my wife struggle to explain why she'd never thought to mention that her husband could solve the exact problems they'd been discussing in board meetings for months. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sierra had been sitting in meetings where they discussed energy costs and sustainability challenges while deliberately concealing that she was married to someone who specialized in exactly those solutions. The next evening, I was sitting by the hotel pool reviewing some project proposals on my laptop when Vanessa appeared beside my lounge chair, having changed from her conference attire into an elegant black dress that suggested this wasn't a casual encounter. She asked if she could join me, and I gestured to the empty chair while closing my laptop to give her my full attention. The Miami skyline glittered across the water as she settled in and got straight to business, explaining that she'd spent the day thinking about our conversation and had a proposition that could be mutually beneficial. She told me her hospital network was planning to retrofit 15 facilities with renewable energy systems over the next 2 years, a project worth several $millions that required exactly the kind of expertise I'd demonstrated. Instead of going through the usual bidding process with large corporate contractors, she was interested in working directly with SolarTech Solutions if I could handle projects of that scope and timeline. I confirmed that we absolutely could, describing our recent expansion and the engineering team I'd built specifically for large commercial installations. Vanessa smiled and pulled out her personal business card, writing her private cell phone number on the back while explaining that she preferred working with entrepreneurs who understood both the technical and business sides of major projects. As she handed me the card, her fingers lingered against mine just long enough to make it clear this conversation had layers beyond the professional opportunity she was offering. She leaned closer and told me that ambitious people deserved partners who celebrated their success rather than hiding it, and that she found my entrepreneurial drive incredibly attractive in a world full of people who played it safe. The moonlight reflected off the pool as she explained that she'd built her career by recognizing talent and potential, whether in business ventures or personal relationships, and she had a strong feeling that working together could lead to something remarkable on multiple levels. I felt the weight of her suggestion settling between us as she described how refreshing it was to meet someone who'd built something significant from the ground up, someone who understood what it meant to take risks and create value rather than just follow established paths. When she stood to leave, Vanessa placed her hand on my arm and suggested I think about what I really wanted from life, both professionally and personally, because opportunities like this didn't come along often and sometimes the biggest risk was not taking one at all. She told me to call her tomorrow if I was interested in exploring both the business partnership and whatever else might develop between two people who clearly understood each other's ambitions. As she walked away, I sat there holding her card and realizing that for the first time in years, someone was offering me exactly the kind of respect and recognition I'd been craving, wrapped in an opportunity that could transform both my business and my personal life in ways Sierra had never been willing to consider. I was still processing Vanessa's proposition when Sierra appeared at the poolside bar 20 minutes later, having apparently been searching for me throughout the hotel. She looked flushed and agitated as she approached my lounge chair, demanding to know what Vanessa had wanted and why they'd been talking for so long in what she called an inappropriately intimate setting. I explained that Vanessa had offered SolarTech Solutions a substantial contract for her hospital network, but Sierra's expression only grew more hostile as she accused me of encouraging unprofessional behavior from her colleague. Before I could clarify that our conversation had been entirely about business opportunities, Sierra spotted Vanessa returning from the bar with a cocktail and marched over to confront her directly in front of at least 30 conference attendees who were enjoying the evening poolside atmosphere. What followed was a public meltdown that destroyed Sierra's professional reputation in real time, captured on multiple phones as she began screaming at Vanessa about sexual harassment and inappropriate conduct. Sierra accused Vanessa of targeting married men and using her administrative position to manipulate vulnerable spouses, her voice carrying across the water as she called Vanessa a desperate cougar who couldn't find her own husband and had to steal other women's relationships instead. The poolside went completely silent except for Sierra's increasingly unhinged accusations about Vanessa touching her husband inappropriately and making unwelcome sexual advances in violation of professional ethics and conference conduct policies. I watched in horror as Sierra threatened to report Vanessa to the veterinary board, the hotel management, and anyone else who would listen to her complaints about predatory behavior from senior administrators who abused their power to seduce younger men. Vanessa stood there calmly sipping her cocktail while Sierra ranted about filing formal harassment charges and making sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person they were dealing with in their new hospital administrator. The irony was absolutely stunning as Sierra, who had spent 2 days treating me like an embarrassing appendage she had to drag around, was now claiming to be the protective wife defending her husband's honor from an aggressive older woman. Several veterinarians started recording the confrontation as Sierra's voice rose to shouting levels, demanding that Vanessa apologize for her inappropriate behavior and promising to make sure her unprofessional conduct was reported to every relevant authority in the veterinary community. Dr. Martinez tried to calm Sierra down, suggesting they move the conversation somewhere more private, but she was beyond reasoning as she continued her public attack on Vanessa's character and professional integrity. When Vanessa finally responded, she spoke quietly and clearly, pointing out that she'd simply discussed renewable energy opportunities with a respected business owner, and that perhaps Sierra should examine why she found her husband's professional expertise so threatening that she'd create this kind of scene to prevent him from pursuing legitimate business opportunities. The crowd of onlookers was obviously recording everything as Sierra screamed that Vanessa was manipulating the situation and trying to destroy her marriage through calculated seduction disguised as business networking. I realized that dozens of veterinarians were watching my wife have a complete public breakdown while falsely accusing a respected colleague of sexual harassment, and that videos of this humiliating scene would be circulating on social media within hours, permanently damaging Sierra's professional reputation in ways she couldn't possibly undo. The Uber ride back to our hotel room was a nightmare of Sierra frantically making damage control phone calls while simultaneously threatening to divorce me if I had any further contact with Vanessa or pursued the solar contract she'd offered. She spent the first 10 minutes calling colleagues who'd witnessed her meltdown, trying to convince them that Vanessa had been sexually harassing me and that her reaction was justified protective behavior from a concerned wife. Between calls, she demanded that I block Vanessa's number, delete her contact information, and promise never to speak with her again because pursuing any business relationship would be a betrayal of our marriage and proof that I was choosing money over my wife's emotional well-being. I listened to Sierra explain to Dr. Martinez that she'd simply been defending her husband from unwelcome advances, then immediately called Dr. Thompson to insist that Vanessa's behavior had been completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Her story kept changing with each conversation as she tried to craft a narrative that would salvage her reputation, but I could tell from the brief responses she was getting that her colleagues weren't buying her version of events. When she finally hung up after the 6th call, Sierra turned her attention back to me with an ultimatum that revealed exactly how she viewed our relationship and my role in it. She told me that if I cared about our marriage at all, I would refuse any business dealings with Vanessa and make it clear that I wasn't interested in whatever game she was playing with married men. The irony was overwhelming as Sierra, who had spent years minimizing my professional achievements and actively hiding my expertise from her colleagues, was now demanding that I sacrifice a multi-million-dollar opportunity to protect her wounded pride. Within 48 hours of returning to Orlando, Sierra's professional world began collapsing in ways that exceeded even my worst predictions about the consequences of her public breakdown. The veterinary board received formal complaints about her conduct at the conference, complete with video evidence of her harassment accusations against a respected colleague. Her own hospital administrator placed her on administrative leave pending an investigation into whether her behavior reflected poorly on their practice's professional standards. Former colleagues who'd seemed supportive during her frantic phone calls began distancing themselves as the full scope of her false accusations became clear through social media posts and conference gossip. Sierra spent her days at home obsessively monitoring her professional reputation online while blaming me for destroying her career by encouraging Vanessa's attention and not immediately shutting down what she insisted was obvious predatory behavior targeting our marriage. A week after returning from Miami, I found myself in Vanessa's penthouse office overlooking Biscayne Bay, having decided that Sierra's ultimatum was actually the clarity I'd needed about our relationship's fundamental problems. Vanessa had called personally to follow up on our poolside conversation, expressing regret about the unpleasant scene Sierra had created but confirming that her business offer remained valid if I was still interested in pursuing it. The contrast between her professional composure and Sierra's hysteria was striking as we discussed contract terms for retrofitting her 15 veterinary facilities with comprehensive solar energy systems. Vanessa had already prepared preliminary technical specifications based on our Miami conversation, demonstrating the kind of thorough preparation and respect for my expertise that Sierra had never shown in 5 years of marriage. We spent 3 hours reviewing project timelines, financing options, and implementation strategies for what would become the largest contract in SolarTech Solutions history, worth approximately $4.2 million over 18 months. During our lunch break, Vanessa made it clear that her interest extended beyond the professional partnership we were developing, asking directly whether my marriage was as troubled as Sierra's public meltdown had suggested it might be. I found myself explaining how Sierra had systematically undermined my confidence and hidden my achievements from her colleagues, treating my successful business like an embarrassing secret rather than something to celebrate. Vanessa listened with the focused attention of someone who understood what it meant to build something significant, then shared her own experiences with partners who'd felt threatened by her professional success rather than proud of it. She told me that ambitious people needed partners who enhanced their strengths rather than diminishing them, and that she'd learned to recognize the difference between genuine love and the kind of insecurity that masqueraded as commitment. When she reached across the table to touch my hand while discussing the mutual respect that successful partnerships required, I realized that everything I'd been missing in my marriage was being offered freely by someone who actually valued what I brought to the table. Our conversation shifted naturally from business collaboration to personal compatibility as Vanessa described her vision for combining our professional strengths with the kind of relationship where both partners celebrated each other's achievements. She explained that she'd been watching me carefully during the conference, impressed not just by my technical expertise but by my dignity in handling Sierra's dismissive treatment and my calm response to her subsequent public breakdown. Vanessa made it clear that she was interested in building something substantial together, both professionally and personally, with someone who understood that true partnership meant elevating each other rather than competing or diminishing. By the end of our meeting, we'd signed a preliminary agreement for the solar retrofit project and exchanged personal contact information with the understanding that our relationship was evolving in directions that went far beyond business collaboration. I drove back to Orlando knowing that my life was about to change dramatically, that I'd finally found someone who saw my potential rather than just tolerating my existence, and that the respect and appreciation I'd been craving for years was suddenly within reach through a partnership that honored both my professional abilities and personal worth. 8 months later, I was standing in the Barcelona offices of SolarTech Solutions International, reviewing expansion plans with Vanessa as my business partner and fiancée, while Sierra's veterinary career remained permanently damaged by the harassment scandal she'd created through her own jealousy and insecurity. The Vanessa contract had transformed my company from a regional player into a multinational renewable energy firm with projects across 3 countries and annual revenue that had increased by 400% since our Miami partnership began. Vanessa's business acumen combined with my technical expertise had created opportunities I'd never imagined possible, including consulting contracts with major hospital networks in Europe and a pending acquisition offer from a German renewable energy consortium. Our personal relationship had developed as naturally as our professional collaboration, built on mutual respect and shared ambitions rather than the constant undermining and dismissal I'd endured with Sierra. When Vanessa accepted my marriage proposal during a sunset dinner in Santorini, celebrating the completion of our largest international installation, I realized that true partnership meant finding someone who elevated your potential rather than diminishing it out of their own inadequacy. Meanwhile, Sierra's attempts to rebuild her veterinary career had failed spectacularly as the harassment allegations she'd fabricated continued haunting her professional reputation through social media and industry gossip networks. She'd lost her position at the Orlando Animal Hospital, been blacklisted by several veterinary practices that considered her a liability, and eventually been forced to move back to her parents' house in rural Ohio where she'd taken a part-time job at a small-town clinic for a fraction of her previous salary. The divorce settlement had been particularly brutal for Sierra since my dramatically increased income meant she received far less than she'd expected, especially after her legal team discovered the business opportunities she'd actively tried to sabotage during our marriage. She'd contested the proceedings by claiming I'd been financially and emotionally abusive, but her own recorded statements about my business being unimportant combined with testimony from colleagues who'd witnessed her dismissive treatment made those allegations completely unsubstantial. Sierra started calling me weekly after the divorce was finalized, initially demanding explanations for how I'd rebuilt my entire life so quickly, then gradually shifting to desperate attempts at reconciliation as she realized what she'd actually lost through her own actions. She wanted to understand how Vanessa and I had created such a successful partnership when she'd never believed my business had any real potential for growth or significance. I found myself explaining to my ex-wife that success comes from finding partners who celebrate your achievements rather than hiding them, who build you up instead of tearing you down, and who see opportunities where others see threats to their own insecure self-image.